Dark Crossovers, Book II Chapter 1, The Start of the X-Force. Deadpool, hey there, bub. Looks like we've got ourselves a new mission. Wolverine, what's the deal this time? Wade, Deadpool, we've gotta protect this teenager named Catherine York from the devil and his army called the Faction. They're trying to start the end of days. X23, sounds like a fun time. Let's go kick some demon butt. As the trio set out to find Catherine, they are met with fierce resistance from the Faction. Vampires, werewolves, and demons all stand in their way, led by the devil's son Anthony Valor and his wife Cleopatra. Wolverine, these guys don't mess around. We're gonna need a plan. Deadpool, plan? Who needs a plan when you've got me, X23? Let's focus on finding Catherine first. She's our top priority. After a fierce battle, the trio finally locate Catherine and manage to get her to safety. But just as they think they've won, Anthony Valor and Cleopatra appear before them, ready to unleash their full power. Anthony Valor, you think you can stop us? We are the bringers of the end of days. Cleopatra, your efforts are futile. The world will fall at our feet. But just as all hope seems lost, a twist occurs. Catherine reveals herself to be more than just a mere teenager. She is actually a powerful sorceress, capable of defeating the Faction on her own. Catherine, you underestimated me. I am not just a helpless girl. I am the key to stopping you. With Catherine's newfound powers, the Faction is defeated and the world is saved from destruction. The trio looks on in awe at the young sorceress who saved them all. Wolverine, looks like we owe you one, kid. Deadpool, not bad for a teenager. Maybe we should recruit her to the team. X23, agreed. Catherine York, welcome to the X-Force. And so, Catherine York joins forces with Deadpool, Wolverine, and X23 to protect the world from any future threats that may arise. The end of days may have been averted, but the battle is far from over. Chapter 2, The Punisher's Rebellion. The Punisher stepped through the portal, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape of the Rebel Moon universe. The air was thick with tension, and he could sense danger lurking around every corner. As he made his way through the bustling city streets, he couldn't help but notice the fear in the eyes of the inhabitants. They whispered amongst themselves, casting wary glances in his direction. "Who are you?" a voice called out from behind him. The Punisher turned to see a group of rebels standing before him, their weapons drawn. "I'm just passing through," he replied calmly, his hand hovering over the gun at his side. The leader of the rebels stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "We don't take kindly to strangers here. What's your business on our moon?" The Punisher's jaw clenched as he assessed the situation. These rebels were no match for him, but he had no desire to cause unnecessary bloodshed. "I'm here on a mission," he said finally. "I'm looking for someone who goes by the name of Blackheart. I've heard he's been causing trouble in this universe." The rebels exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. "Blackheart is a dangerous man," the leader said. "But he's not our concern. We have our own battles to fight." The Punisher nodded, understanding their reluctance to get involved. "I'll handle Blackheart myself," he said. "But if you have any information that could help me, I'd appreciate it." The rebels hesitated, but eventually one of them stepped forward. "There's a bar on the outskirts of town where Blackheart is known to frequent," he said. You might find him there. Thank you, the Punisher said, nodding in gratitude. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his mission clear in his mind. As he made his way to the bar, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He knew that Blackheart was a formidable opponent, but he was determined to bring him to justice. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with smoke and the sound of raucous laughter. The Punisher scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Blackheart sitting at a table in the corner. Without hesitation, he approached the notorious criminal, his hand resting on the hilt of his gun. Blackheart, he said, his voice cold and unwavering. It's time to pay for your crimes. Blackheart looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. Ah, the Punisher. I've been expecting you. The two men locked eyes, the tension between them palpable. The Punisher knew that this would be a fight to the death, but he was prepared to do whatever it took to bring Blackheart to justice. And Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher, stood over the lifeless body of his nemesis, Blackheart. The battle had been long and brutal, but finally, justice had been served. As he prepared to return to his own universe, he caught sight of a fierce battle raging in the distance. The rebels were being overwhelmed by the forces of the Imperium, and Frank knew he couldn't just walk away. He had always been a man of action, a man who fought for what was right. Without hesitation, he joined the fight, taking down the massive army with ruthless efficiency. But as the battle raged on, Frank realized that he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. And so, he set out to recruit a team of powerful allies to stand by his side. First, he sought out Daredevil, the blind vigilante with a keen sense of justice. Next, he found Jessica Jones, a tough-as-nails private investigator with a dark past. Batman, the brooding Dark Knight of Gotham, was next on his list, followed by Wonder Woman, the fierce warrior princess of Themyscira. The team continued to grow as Frank enlisted the Marvels and She-Hulk, each bringing their own unique skills to the fight. But just when it seemed like they might be overwhelmed, a surprise cameo changed everything. Deadpool, the wisecracking mercenary with a penchant for chaos, arrived on the scene with Wolverine, X23, and a powerful sorceress named Catherine, also known as Widowmaker. Together, they formed X-Force, a formidable force to be reckoned with. As the battle raged on, the combined might of the heroes proved too much for the Imperium and the King's army. With their powers combined, they were able to turn the tide of the battle and emerge victorious. In the end, Frank Castle stood tall, a true hero in every sense of the word. And as he looked out at the battlefield, he knew that as long as there were those who sought to do harm, he and his team would always be there to stand in their way. Chapter 3: The Unknown Terror After Surviving Death in the Void. Blade, Gambit and Electra have wound up in an unknown universe where after sundown creatures appears as human to devour humans, and so happen Blade, Gambit and Electra have come at the wrong time and they hear screaming of a busload of tourists who have taken the wrong turn, and Blade sees what these creatures can do. Blade, alright, we need to come up with a plan to take down these creatures before they take down any more innocent people. Electra, agreed. They're fast and deadly, but we can't let them continue to terrorize this town. The next day Gambit, I've been scouting around, and it seems like they only come out at night. We need to be prepared for when the sun sets. Blade, I'll take the first watch tonight. I need to make sure I'm fully healed before we take on these creatures. Electra, we'll take the second watch. We need to protect the townspeople and the new arrivals. As the sun sets, Blade takes his position on the rooftop, watching as the creatures begin to emerge from the shadows. He can feel their presence, their hunger for blood. Blade, they're coming. Get ready. Gambit and Electra stand at the ready, weapons in hand, as the creatures approach. They move quickly, their movements almost too fast for the human eye to follow. Blade, now, the three of them spring into action, fighting off the creatures with all their might. Blade's sword slices through the air, while Electra's sayas strike true and Gambit's cards explode in a shower of sparks. But just as they think they've won the battle, a new threat emerges from the darkness. A creature unlike any they've ever seen before, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. Blade, what is that thing, Electra? I don't know, but we need to take it down before it takes us down. Gambit, let's do this. The three of them charge at the new creature, their weapons clashing against its tough hide. But it's no use, the creature is too powerful. Blade, we need to retreat for now. We'll come up with a new plan to take it down. As they make their escape, Blade can't help but feel a sense of unease. This new threat is unlike anything they've ever faced before, and he knows that they'll need to be stronger than ever to defeat it. But for now, they'll regroup and come up with a plan to save the town from this new danger. The night may be dark and full of terrors, but Blade, Electra, and Gambit have a new purpose and a new way of living. Blade is content with where is now and back in action. Gambit is happy to matter, and this will make him a legend, and his story is just beginning. Electra, the star of this trio, rallied the people of this town to create a new way of life and trained the people of this town for the battle that is coming a few days later. Finally, under the cloak of darkness, the trio embarked on their perilous mission. Gambit, with his mastery of kinetic energy, unleashed a barrage of explosive cards, illuminating the night sky and disorienting the creatures. Blade, wielding his signature sword and fueled by his insatiable thirst for vengeance against the undead, engaged in a relentless battle against the monstrous foes. Electra, her movements as swift as lightning, employed her deadly sai to strike down the creatures with surgical precision. As the battle raged on, the townspeople watched in awe from their windows, their hearts filled with hope and gratitude for the unexpected saviors who had come to their aid. The combined might of Gambit, Blade, and Electra proved too formidable for the creatures to withstand, and one by one, they fell beneath the heroes' relentless assault. With the last creature vanquished, the town was finally liberated from the clutches of terror. The townspeople emerged from their homes, their faces beaming with relief and admiration for the extraordinary heroes who had saved them. Gambit, Blade, and Electra, having fulfilled their mission, shared a knowing glance, their spirits united by the bond of camaraderie forged in the heat of battle. And so, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden rays upon the grateful town, the three heroes bid farewell to their newfound friends and departed into the unknown, their hearts filled with the satisfaction of having made a difference in a world plagued by darkness. And the road opens up leading to another town, and now townspeople can finally go home. Chapter 4, The Guardians Horizon. The Milanos sailed through the blackness of space, a silent sentinel of stars and planets. Its crew was a motley one, bound together by circumstance and the unspoken pact of survival. Among them was Rocket Raccoon, his eyes darting nervously around the cockpit, his fingers dancing across the controls with a precision that belied his rough exterior. Beside him, Groot stood like a living statue, his branches swaying gently in the cabin's artificial gravity, a silent sentinel in his own right. Below, in the common area, the rest of the crew was gathered. Drax the Destroyer, a towering figure of muscle and fury, stood at the center of the room, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that floated before him. On the screen, a 3D model of the Milano buzzed with golden lines, each one representing the ship's systems and the flow of information between them. Drax's brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers tracing the pathways of data as if he were navigating the stars themselves. To one side, Gamora, the deadly assassin, leaned against a wall, her eyes narrowed in contemplation. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of caution and strategic planning, her mind ever alert to potential threats. Beside her, Nebula, the enigmatic warrior with a past shrouded in mystery, stood in silence, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion that few could fathom. Thor, the Asgardian god of thunder, and Lady Sif, his warrior love, stood apart from the others, their bond evident in the way they moved in tandem, their every action a dance of strength and elegance. They were a stark contrast to the rest of the crew, their presence a reminder of the world of gods and titans that lay beyond the reaches of human understanding. As the Milano approached the midpoint of its mission, a sense of unease settled over the crew. They had faced many dangers in their travels, but the unknown was always the greatest enemy of all. And as they ventured deeper into the void, they could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking their every move. The sensation of being watched intensified as the Milano's sensors picked up an anomalous energy signature on the edge of their sensor range. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a whisper in the cosmic wind. Rocket's hand instinctively tightened on the armrest of his chair, his grip radiating white-knuckle tension. He exchanged a glance with Gamora, her eyes reflecting his own concern. Drax, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence. "We alter course," he declared, his voice a low rumble that filled the cockpit. "This energy signature, it is not natural." Rocket's gaze snapped back to the sensor readings, his mind racing with possibilities. The energy signature was unlike anything they had encountered before, a unique blend of frequencies that suggested a technology far beyond their own. It could be a trap, a lure to draw them into the jaws of some unseen predator. Or it could be a call for help, a beacon of desperation from a ship in distress. Despite his misgivings, Rocket knew they could not ignore the signal. The Guardians were a team of protectors and rescuers, their code of honor demanding that they investigate and aid those in need. With a heavy sigh, he relinquished control of the Milano to the autopilot, his fingers dancing across the console as he plotted a course towards the source of the energy signature. As the Milano altered its course, the crew fell silent, each member lost in their own thoughts and fears. The unknown was a vast and terrifying place, full of hidden dangers and unseen threats. And as they ventured further into the darkness of space, they could not help but wonder if they were walking into a trap, or if they were about to uncover a secret that was better left unspoken. The Milano's engines hummed with a steady power as the ship adjusted its course to intercept the mysterious energy signature. Rocket's eyes never left the viewscreen, where the stars streaked past in a dizzying display of celestial motion. Beside him, Groot's branches swayed in time with the ship's movements, his silent presence a comforting constant in the face of the unknown. In the common area, the rest of the crew was on edge, their senses heightened by the looming mystery. Drax stood at the center of the room, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that showed their progress towards the source of the energy signature. His brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers tracing the pathways of data as if he were navigating the stars themselves. Gamora and Nebula stood apart from the others, their expressions guarded and wary. They had both seen their fair share of deception and betrayal, their instincts honed to a fine edge by years of surviving in a galaxy rife with danger and intrigue. They knew that trust was a commodity that should never be given freely, and they were determined to keep their wits about them as they approached the mysterious energy signature. Thor and Lady Sif, for their part, seemed almost undisturbed by the developing situation. Their bond was strong and unbreakable, their confidence rooted in their shared history and their unshakable belief in one another. They moved through the common area with a grace and poise that belied the gravity of their situation, their presence a calming influence on the others. As the Milano drew closer to the source of the energy signature, the crew's tension reached a fever pitch. The unknown was a formidable adversary, one that could not be defeated with brute force or clever tactics. It would require all of their skills and cunning to unravel the mystery that awaited them, and to emerge victorious from the trials that lay ahead. The Milano's sensors picked up the ship long before it came into view on the viewscreen. It was a vessel unlike any they had seen before, its sleek lines and advanced design a stark contrast to the worn and weathered hull of the Milano. As the ship grew larger in the viewport, the crew could see that it was adrift, its engines dark and unresponsive. Rocket's fingers flew across the console, his mind racing with theories and possibilities. The ship's advanced design suggested that it was a pleasure cruiser or a high-end exploration vessel, the kind of ship that only the wealthiest and most powerful individuals could afford. But why was it adrift, and why was it emitting an energy signature that was unlike anything they had encountered before? Drax's gaze never wavered from the viewscreen as he assessed the situation. His years of combat experience had taught him to be cautious, and his instincts were screaming at him to steer clear of the mysterious ship. He knew that the unknown was a dangerous thing, and that not all mysteries were worth solving. Gamora and Nebula, for their part, were already planning their approach. They knew that they would have to proceed with caution, that they would need to be prepared for anything. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They would protect one another, no matter what lay ahead. Thor and Lady Sif, meanwhile, seemed to be in their own world, their bond evident in the way they moved in tandem. They were a force to be reckoned with, their combined strength and resolve a beacon of hope in the face of uncertainty. As they prepared to board the mysterious ship, they did so with a sense of purpose and determination. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they were together. The Milano's engines died down as it came to a stop beside the mysterious ship. The crew gathered in the common area, their eyes fixed on the viewscreen as they took in the sight of the derelict vessel. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the vast expanse of space, a silent sentinel of abandonment and despair. Rocket's voice cut through the tension that filled the room. "All right, here's the plan. Gamora and Nebula will board first and do a sweep of the ship. Drax and the Asgardians will follow, covering their tracks. Once they've secured the ship, I'll head to the power core to see if I can get the engines online." Gamora nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her belt. She and Nebula made their way to the airlock, their movements fluid and practiced. They stepped into the airlock and cycled through, their minds focused on the task at hand. The airlock hissed open, revealing the darkened interior of the mysterious ship. The interior of the ship was eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of decay and rust. Gamora and Nebula moved through the corridors with caution, their senses alert to the slightest sound or movement. The ship was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and abandoned chambers, its once opulent decor now faded and peeling. As they explored the ship, Gamora and Nebula stumbled upon a series of cryptic symbols etched into the walls. They were unlike any language they had ever seen, a complex series of glyphs that seemed to dance in the dim light of their flashlights. Nebula reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the ship's hull. She could feel the vibrations of the ship's forgotten past, a silent echo that resonated deep within her soul. Meanwhile, Drax and the Asgardians made their way through the ship's cargo bays. The bays were filled with rows upon rows of crates and containers, each one bearing the symbol of a different planet or star system. The Asgardians examined the crates with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, their years of experience with alien cultures and technologies giving them a keen eye for potential threats. Rocket's voice crackled over the comms system as he made his way to the ship's power core. "I'm approaching the core. The ship's systems are offline, but the core itself seems to be operational." Groot's response was a soft, rumbling chitter, his voice filled with a strange sense of calm. Rocket's grip on the control stick tightened ever so slightly, his mind racing with possibilities. He had seen many strange and wondrous things during his long life as a space smuggler, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that awaited him in the power core. The core was a vast chamber filled with complex machinery and glowing lines of energy. In the center of the chamber stood a massive crystalline structure, its facets reflecting the light in a dazzling display of color and light. Rocket approached the core with a sense of awe, his fingers reaching out to touch the smooth surface of the crystal. As soon as his skin made contact with the crystal, the core erupted in a brilliant flash of light. Rocket was knocked off his feet, his senses overwhelmed by a cascade of images and sensations that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. He could feel the weight of countless stars pressing down upon him, the fabric of reality stretching and warping around him. When the light faded, Rocket found himself standing in a desolate landscape, the stars above him no longer the gentle balls of light that he was used to. Instead, they were twisted and distorted, their light writhing and wriggling like living serpents. He turned to see the Milano, but it was no longer the familiar shape that he knew. It was a grotesque parody of itself, its hull twisted and deformed, its engines sputtering and coughing out plumes of dark smoke. Rocket's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The ship's power core had somehow activated a portal to another dimension, a place where the laws of physics no longer applied. He was trapped in a nightmare realm, a place where his deepest fears and anxieties had taken on a life of their own. Back on the Milano, the rest of the crew was growing increasingly concerned about Rocket's prolonged absence. Gamora and Nebula were on edge, their senses attuned to the slightest hint of danger. Thor and Lady Sif, meanwhile, were a study in contrasts, their confidence and determination a beacon of hope in the face of uncertainty. It was Drax who finally broke the silence. "Something is wrong," he declared, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. "Rocket should not be taking this long." Gamora's eyes narrowed as she considered Drax's words. She knew that Rocket was capable of taking care of himself, but she also knew that he could sometimes be reckless and impulsive. She decided that it would be best to investigate further, to make sure that Rocket was safe and that the situation on the mysterious ship was under control. The crew made their way back to the airlock, their movements purposeful and efficient. They stepped into the airlock and cycled through, their minds focused on the task at hand. The airlock hissed open, revealing the dimly lit interior of the mysterious ship. As they made their way through the corridors, they stumbled upon a series of doorways that led to small, enclosed spaces. Inside these spaces, they found the bodies of the ship's original crew, their corpses twisted and contorted in unnatural positions, their eyes wide open in frozen expressions of terror. The crew was silent as they took in the horrific sight before them. They knew that they were dealing with something truly sinister, a threat that was far beyond their initial understanding. They vowed to uncover the truth behind the mysterious ship and its tragic fate, even as a creeping sense of dread began to take root in their minds. The darkness of the mysterious ship seemed to press in around them, a palpable presence that threatened to suffocate them with its oppressive weight. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rust, and the silence was broken only by the faint sound of distant whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. Gamora and Nebula moved through the ship with caution, their senses alert to the slightest sound or movement. They knew that they were not alone, that something malevolent lurked in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a sight that made their blood run cold. The corridor ahead of them was lined with the bodies of the ship's crew, their eyes wide open in frozen expressions of horror. It was clear that they had been brutally slaughtered, their deaths a grim testament to the violence that had consumed the ship. Gamora's hand instinctively reached for the dagger at her belt, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge and retribution. She knew that they were dealing with a force of darkness that was beyond human comprehension, a threat that would require all of their skill and cunning to overcome. Meanwhile, Drax and the Asgardians had split off from the main group, their search for Rocket taking them deeper into the bowels of the mysterious ship. They moved through the corridors with purposeful strides, their senses attuned to the subtlest shifts in the environment around them. It was Lady Sif who first sensed the change in the air. She slowed her pace, her instincts telling her that something was amiss. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sword, her fingers tightening around the cool metal of the blade. As they turned a corner, they were met with a sight that made their blood run cold. The corridor ahead of them was filled with the bodies of the ship's crew, their corpses twisted and contorted in grotesque positions, their eyes wide open in frozen expressions of terror and agony. The discovery of the crew's bodies sent a chill down the spines of the Milano's crew. They knew that they were dealing with something truly sinister, a threat that was far beyond their initial understanding. They vowed to uncover the truth behind the mysterious ship and its tragic fate, even as a creeping sense of dread began to take root in their minds. As they continued their search for Rocket, they stumbled upon a series of cryptic symbols etched into the walls of the ship. They were unlike any language they had ever seen, a complex series of glyphs that seemed to dance in the dim light of their flashlights. Nebula reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the ship's hull. She could feel the vibrations of the ship's forgotten past, a silent echo that resonated deep within her soul. The symbols seemed to be some sort of warning, a message from the ship's original crew about the dangers that lay within. But the message was incomplete, the symbols stopping abruptly in the middle of a sentence, as if the crew had been interrupted before they could finish their warning. The crew's sense of unease continued to grow as they delved deeper into the ship. They could feel the weight of the ship's dark history pressing down upon them, the air thick with the scent of decay and rust. They knew that they were walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between safety and disaster. It was in this state of heightened tension and anticipation that they finally found Rocket. He was standing in the center of a large chamber, surrounded by a circle of candles that flickered in the dim light. His eyes were wide open, his face twisted into a mask of terror and madness. As the crew approached him, they could see that he was surrounded by a halo of distorted light, his body flickering with strange, otherworldly energy. It was clear that he was in the grip of some sort of supernatural force, a force that was beyond their understanding or control. The crew's initial relief at finding Rocket quickly turned to horror as they realized the true extent of the situation. The ship around them was not what it seemed, its walls and corridors a mere facade that concealed a terrifying reality. As they watched, the ship's interior began to shift and contort, the very fabric of reality seeming to bend and warp in ways that defied explanation. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening and twisting into grotesque forms that moved of their own accord. Gamera's instincts screamed at her to get away from the ship, to escape the nightmare realm that had claimed Rocket and now threatened to ensnare them all. She reached out to Thor, her eyes pleading with him to understand the gravity of their situation. Thor, however, was nowhere to be found. In his place, they found Lady Sif, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. She told them that Thor had gone off on his own, drawn to some unknown part of the ship by a strange compulsion that she could neither explain nor resist. The crew knew that they had to act fast. They had to find Thor and get off the ship before it was too late. They split up, each member of the team moving through the twisted corridors in search of their missing ally. As they delved deeper into the heart of the ship, they encountered all manner of bizarre and terrifying phenomena. The ship's corridors shifted and changed direction, leading them in circles or to dead ends. The air was filled with strange noises and the sound of distant whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. Despite the overwhelming sense of dread that filled their hearts, the crew pressed on, driven by their determination to find Thor and escape the clutches of the mysterious ship. They knew that their lives depended on their ability to work together as a team, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead and to emerge victorious from the trials that awaited them. The Milano's crew moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the mysterious ship, their senses heightened by the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded them. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rust, and the silence was broken only by the faint sound of distant whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. Gamora led the way, her instincts guiding her through the twisting maze of corridors. She could feel the weight of the ship's dark history pressing down upon her, the air charged with a palpable sense of dread and foreboding. Beside her, Nebula moved with a quiet determination, her mind focused on the task at hand. As they turned a corner, they were met with a sight that made their blood run cold. The corridor ahead of them was filled with the bodies of the ship's original crew, their corpses twisted and contorted in grotesque positions, their eyes wide open in frozen expressions of terror and agony. Gamora's hand instinctively reached for the dagger at her belt, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge and retribution. The discovery of the crew's bodies sent a chill down the spines of the Milano's crew. They knew that they were dealing with something truly sinister, a threat that was far beyond their initial understanding. They vowed to uncover the truth behind the mysterious ship and its tragic fate, even as a creeping sense of dread began to take root in their minds. As they continued their search for Thor, they stumbled upon a series of cryptic symbols etched into the walls of the ship. They were unlike any language they had ever seen, a complex series of glyphs that seemed to dance in the dim light of their flashlights. Nebula reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the ship's hull. She could feel the vibrations of the ship's forgotten past, a silent echo that resonated deep within her soul. The symbols seemed to be some sort of warning, a message from the ship's original crew about the dangers that lay within. But the message was incomplete, the symbols stopping abruptly in the middle of a sentence, as if the crew had been interrupted before they could finish their warning. The crew's sense of unease continued to grow as they delved deeper into the ship. They could feel the weight of the ship's dark history pressing down upon them, the air thick with the scent of decay and rust. They knew that they were walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between safety and disaster. It was in this state of heightened tension and anticipation that they finally found Rocket. He was standing in the center of a large chamber, surrounded by a circle of candles that flickered in the dim light. His eyes were wide open, his face twisted into a mask of terror and madness. As the crew approached him, they could see that he was surrounded by a halo of distorted light, his body flickering with strange, otherworldly energy. It was clear that he was in the grip of some sort of supernatural force, a force that was beyond their understanding or control. The crew's initial relief at finding Rocket quickly turned to horror as they realized the true extent of the situation. The ship around them was not what it seemed, its walls and corridors a mere facade that concealed a terrifying reality. As they watched, the ship's interior began to shift and contort, the very fabric of reality seeming to bend and warp in ways that defied explanation. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening and twisting into grotesque forms that moved of their own accord. Gamera's instincts screamed at her to get away from the ship, to escape the nightmare realm that had claimed Rocket and now threatened to ensnare them all. She reached out to Thor, her eyes pleading with him to understand the gravity of their situation. Thor, however, was nowhere to be found. In his place, they found Lady Sif, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. She told them that Thor had gone off on his own, drawn to some unknown part of the ship by a strange compulsion that she could neither explain nor resist. The crew knew that they had to act fast. They had to find Thor and get off the ship before it was too late. They split up, each member of the team moving through the twisted corridors in search of their missing ally. As they delved deeper into the heart of the ship, they encountered all manner of bizarre and terrifying phenomena. The ship's corridors shifted and changed direction, leading them in circles or to dead ends. The air was filled with strange noises and the sound of distant whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. Despite the overwhelming sense of dread that filled their hearts, the crew pressed on, driven by their determination to find Thor and escape the clutches of the mysterious ship. They knew that their lives depended on their ability to work together as a team, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead and to emerge victorious from the trials that awaited them. Their search led them to a part of the ship that was shrouded in darkness, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and burning rubber. The walls were streaked with strange symbols that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. It was here, in the heart of the ship, that they finally found Thor. He was standing in the center of a large chamber, his body surrounded by a halo of intense, blinding light. His eyes were wide open, his face contorted in a mask of concentration and fear. The chamber was filled with a cacophony of sounds, the air crackling with raw, unchecked energy. The walls of the chamber were covered in a complex network of wires and circuitry, the various components of the ship's experimental gravity drive. Thor was in the process of attempting to shut down the gravity drive, his hands dancing across the controls with a precision and dexterity that belied the chaos that surrounded him. His face was a mask of intense focus, his eyes flickering with the effort of maintaining his concentration. Gamora and Nebula approached Thor, their minds racing with thoughts of how they could help him. They could see the strain that the task was putting on him, the way that his muscles were tensing with effort, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. As they watched, Thor's hands paused in their movements, his eyes widening in surprise and horror. A sudden surge of energy pulsed through the ship, causing the ground to shake and the air to crackle with electricity. The gravity drive was going into overdrive, its systems overwhelmed by the sheer amount of energy that it was attempting to harness. The ship around them was being pulled apart at the seams, the very fabric of reality seeming to tear apart before their eyes. Thor's eyes met Gamora's, a silent communication passing between them. They knew that they had to act fast, to somehow manage to shut down the gravity drive before it was too late. Gamora turned to Nebula, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We need to find the manual override," she said, her words echoing in the charged air of the chamber. "If we can reach it before the ship implodes, we might still have a chance to save Thor and escape this nightmare." Nebula nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Together, the two women began to search the chamber for the override, their movements swift and decisive. As Gamora and Nebula searched for the manual override, the rest of the crew was dealing with their own harrowing experiences. Drax, who had been searching for Rocket, found himself confronted with a vision of his past, a nightmare hallucination that threatened to overwhelm him. He was standing in a vast, open plain, the sky above him a swirling vortex of colors that seemed to dance and writhe in agony. Before him stood a figure that was identical to his own, its eyes filled with a cold, calculating fury. The figure raised its hand, and Drax felt a surge of fear. He knew that this was merely a manifestation of his own fears and doubts, a creation of the Event Horizon's dark magic. But the fear was real, a tangible force that threatened to consume him entirely. Drax fought back against the fear, his mind focused on the task at hand. He knew that he had to find Rocket and help him shut down the gravity drive before it was too late. Meanwhile, Rocket was trapped within his own personal hell, a place where his deepest fears and insecurities had taken on a life of their own. He was being pursued by a monstrous creature, its form constantly shifting and changing, its eyes filled with a malevolence that was beyond comprehension. Rocket's mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion, his senses overwhelmed by the intensity of the nightmare that surrounded him. But amidst the chaos, he found a spark of determination, a fierce resolve that refused to be extinguished. He knew that he had to find a way out of the nightmare, to overcome the fear and uncertainty that threatened to engulf him. With a newfound sense of purpose, he began to fight back against the monstrous creature that was pursuing him, his actions fueled by a desperate desire to survive and escape the clutches of the Event Horizon. As the gravity drive continued to malfunction, the ship around them began to fracture and break apart. The crew could feel the fabric of reality bending and warping, the air filled with the sound of rending metal and the scent of burning electronics. Thor's voice cut through the chaos, his words echoing in the charged air of the chamber. "We must act quickly," he declared, his eyes locked on Gamora and Nebula. "The manual override is not responding to our commands. We must find another way to shut down the gravity drive before it's too late." Gamora and Nebula exchanged a glance, their minds racing with thoughts of how they could possibly manage to overcome the latest obstacle that had been placed in their path. They knew that they were running out of time, that the gravity drive was rapidly approaching a critical failure that could spell disaster for them all. With a shared sense of purpose, they turned their attention to the complex network of wires and circuitry that surrounded Thor. They could see the raw energy that pulsed through the ship's systems, the various components of the gravity drive flickering with an otherworldly glow. It was then that Nebula spotted something unusual. Among the tangled mess of wires and circuitry, there was a single, unconnected wire that seemed to be pulsing with a steady, rhythmic beat. It was unlike anything they had seen before, an anomaly in the otherwise chaotic landscape of the ship's interior. Gamora's eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of the wire. She could feel a strange sense of connection to the wire, a sense that it might hold the key to shutting down the gravity drive and saving them all. She reached out and touched the wire, her fingers brushing against its smooth, metallic surface. As soon as she made contact with the wire, the air around them seemed to charge with energy, the very fabric of reality seeming to shift and bend in ways that defied explanation. The touch of the wire sent a surge of energy through Gamora, her body tingling with the force of the connection she had made with the ship's systems. She could feel the flow of information pulsing through her mind, a cascade of raw, unfiltered data that threatened to overload her senses. Despite the overwhelming sensation that enveloped her, Gamora refused to allow her mind to be clouded by the influx of information. She focused her thoughts, her mind seeking out the one piece of data that she needed in order to shut down the gravity drive. And then, as if in response to her innermost desires, the answer came to her. She could see it, a clear and concise sequence of commands that, if entered correctly, would have the desired effect of deactivating the gravity drive. With the sequence of commands committed to memory, Gamora turned to Nebula and Thor. "I think I've found the solution," she announced, her voice steady and sure despite the turmoil that raged around them. "We need to enter this sequence into the ship's computer in order to shut down the gravity drive." The others nodded, their faces a mask of determination and hope. They knew that they had to act fast, to trust in Gamora's skills and expertise if they were to have any chance of escaping the clutches of the Event Horizon. As they began to work together to enter the sequence of commands, the ship around them continued to fracture and break apart. The gravity drive was approaching a critical failure, its systems screaming in agony as they struggled to contain the raw energy that they were attempting to harness. Despite the chaos and uncertainty that surrounded them, the crew pressed on, their minds focused on the task at hand. They knew that their lives depended on their ability to work together as a team, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead and to emerge victorious from the trials that awaited them. As the sequence of commands was entered into the ship's computer, the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble and shake. The gravity drive systems flared with a brilliant, blinding light, the air filling with the sound of grinding metal and the scent of ozone and burning rubber. The crew held their breath as they watched the gravity drive's energy output begin to decrease, the ship's interior growing quieter and more subdued with each passing second. It was clear that the sequence of commands that Gamora had discovered was working, that the gravity drive was slowly but surely being brought under control. But just as they thought that they were about to emerge victorious from their ordeal, a sudden, unexpected complication arose. The ship's computer, which had been functioning erratically throughout their journey, suddenly went dark, its screens flickering and dying before their eyes. The crew exchanged worried glances, their hearts sinking as they realized the gravity of the situation. Without the ship's computer, they had no way of navigating the Milano back to safety, no way of knowing for certain whether or not the gravity drive had been completely shut down. Despite their growing sense of dread and uncertainty, the crew refused to give up hope. They knew that they had come too far and endured too much to allow themselves to be defeated by a single setback. They vowed to use their combined skills and knowledge to find a way out of their predicament, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead and to emerge victorious from the trials that awaited them. As they worked together to devise a plan of action, the ship around them seemed to grow quieter and more still. The gravity drive's energy output had stabilized, its systems no longer straining against the raw power that it was attempting to harness. The crew could feel a sense of cautious optimism growing within them, a sense that they might actually have a chance of escaping the clutches of the Event Horizon. But they also knew that their journey was far from over, that the road ahead of them was fraught with danger and uncertainty. The Milano's engines hummed with a gentle, reassuring power as the ship made its way back towards the safety of established space lanes. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief as they watched the Event Horizon recede into the distance, its once majestic form now a twisted, broken thing, a testament to the horrors that they had endured. Rocket, who had been silent and withdrawn since the incident, finally broke his self-imposed isolation. He turned to the rest of the crew, his eyes reflecting a deep and abiding sense of sorrow and regret. "I should have seen it coming," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I should have known that the Event Horizon was more than just a derelict ship. It was a trap, a lure designed to draw unsuspecting prey into its clutches." Gamora placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with understanding and empathy. "We all saw it coming," she replied. "We all knew that there was more to the Event Horizon than met the eye. We just didn't know what it was or what it wanted from us." Rocket nodded, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," he said. "I guess we didn't. But now we do. And now we have to make sure that no one else falls into the same trap that we did." The crew nodded in agreement, their minds filled with thoughts of the future and the role that they would play in it. They knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges and more trials to come. But they also knew that they were ready to face whatever the universe might throw their way. As they sailed through the void of space, the Milano and its crew were more than just a group of individuals bound together by a common purpose. They were a family, a band of brothers and sisters united by their shared experiences and their unwavering belief in one another. And as they looked out at the stars that surrounded them, they knew that they would always stand together, no matter what dangers or uncertainties lay ahead. The Milano's crew gathered in the common area, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had survived their encounter with the Event Horizon, but the experience had left them all changed in ways that they were only beginning to understand. Rocket stood before them, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment. "We faced down the unknown and we emerged victorious. We proved that we can handle anything that the universe throws our way." The crew murmured their agreement, their spirits lifted by Rocket's words. They knew that they had been through something profound and transformative, something that would shape the course of their lives for years to come. As they discussed their next steps, the Milano's sensors picked up an incoming transmission. It was a weak, garbled signal, barely intelligible against the background noise of the cosmos. Gamora's hand instinctively reached for the communication device, her mind already racing with possibilities. She brought the device to her ear, her eyes narrowing as she attempted to decipher the contents of the message. After a few moments of concentrated effort, Gamora finally managed to make out the words that were being transmitted. They were a distress signal, a plea for help from a ship that was in trouble. The crew exchanged worried glances, their hearts sinking as they realized the gravity of the situation. They had just survived one harrowing ordeal, and now it seemed that they were being called upon to face another. But even as they grappled with the uncertainty and danger that lay ahead, the crew of the Milano also felt a sense of purpose and belonging. They were the guardians of the galaxy, a team of heroes who had been brought together by fate and circumstance to face the challenges of the universe head-on. And as they prepared to answer the call for help, they knew that they would do whatever it took to save the day, to protect the innocent, and to uphold the values and ideals that they held dear. The story of the Milano's crew was far from over, and as they sailed through the stars, they carried with them the knowledge that they were ready for whatever the future might hold. Chapter 5, The Return of the Daywalker. The year was 1998 when Jessica Whistler, affectionately known as Whistler to her comrades, first introduced Hannibal King to the odd concept of social blending. The two were in the midst of a morning coffee session in a quaint cafe tucked away in the heart of New York. Whistler, with her long silver hair and piercing blue eyes, leaned in close to King, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hanny, you know that when we go out there, we have to blend in, right?" We can't very well go around looking like a couple of bikers, now can we? King, a man of imposing stature with a bald head and a thick beard that seemed to have a life of its own, chuckled. Well, when you put it that way, I guess not. His deep laughter filled the small space, drawing the attention of a few nearby patrons. Whistler playfully rolled her eyes. Exactly. We need to be able to move among them, to hear them when they think they're alone. We need to know what they're planning. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of determination and mischief. As the two continued their discussion, a young man with spiky black hair and piercing brown eyes watched them from across the room. He had been following their conversation with rapt attention, taking in every word. There was something about these two that piqued his interest, something that set them apart from the rest of the world. The young man's name was Eric Brooks, but he preferred to go by the name Blade. He had been on his own since he was a teenager, surviving on the streets and honing his skills as a hunter of the undead. Blade was no stranger to the world of vampires. In fact, he had dedicated his life to ridding the world of these creatures of the night. As Blade made his way through the bustling streets of New York, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to go down. He had been tracking a group of vampires for weeks, following their trail of blood and murder across the city. And now, as he stood on the rooftop of a high-rise building, he knew that the time had come to make his move. Below him, the city was alive with the hustle and bustle of everyday life. People moved along the streets, completely unaware of the danger that lurked among them. But Blade was different. He was a predator in a world filled with prey, and he was ready to strike. Blade's heart raced as he prepared for the battle ahead. He had lived for years, evading the vampires and their relentless pursuit of him. But he had always known that his time was limited. Eventually, he would run out of places to hide, and then there would be nowhere left for him to turn. As he scanned the rooftops, his eyes landed on a group of vampires gathered in an alleyway several blocks away. They were a vicious-looking bunch, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Blade knew that this was the group he had been tracking. They were the ones who had been leaving a trail of death in their wake, preying on the innocent and feasting on their blood. Without hesitation, Blade sprang into action. He leapt from the rooftop, his movements fluid and precise. He landed on the ground below with a silent thud, and immediately set off towards the group of vampires. His heart pounded in his chest, but he felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was what he had been born for, what he had been waiting for his entire life. As Blade approached the alleyway, he could hear the vampires' guttural chatter. They were discussing their latest conquest, boasting about the lives they had claimed. Blade's grip tightened on the stake he held in his hand. He would show them what it meant to cross paths with the Daywalker. The vampires looked up as Blade emerged from the shadows. Their eyes widened in recognition and fear. They knew who he was, the legendary figure who had managed to evade them for so long. But they also knew that their time was up. One by one, they reached for their weapons, their movements slow and labored. Blade was upon them before they could react. He moved with a grace and speed that belied his muscular build. His stake glinted in the moonlight as he struck down the first vampire with a swift and deadly thrust. The creature let out a cry of pain and surprise as it crumpled to the ground, the stake buried deep in its chest. The other vampires were quick to follow suit. Blade targeted them one by one, his movements precise and calculated. He was a killing machine, a guardian of the night who would not rest until the threat had been neutralized. As the last vampire fell to the ground, Blade stood victorious. The alleyway was now silent, save for the soft sound of his heavy breathing. He had done what he had set out to do, but he knew that this was far from over. There were more vampires out there, and he would have to be ready to face them whenever they came. As the vampires lay defeated on the cold, damp ground, Blade felt a sense of satisfaction. He had faced down one of the most dangerous threats in the world, and he had emerged victorious. But he also knew that this was no cause for celebration. Vampires were resilient creatures, and they would not take this defeat lying down. Blade began to search the bodies for any information that might aid him in his ongoing struggle against the undead. He was particularly interested in finding out who had been leading these vampires, who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. He knew that this individual would be powerful, someone with a significant amount of influence within the vampire community. After a thorough search, Blade discovered a small, hidden compartment in the pocket of one of the vampires. Inside, he found a series of cryptic notes and photographs, along with a key. The notes appeared to be a diary of sorts, detailing the vampire's travels and encounters with other creatures of the night. The photographs showed scenes of violence and bloodshed, images that Blade recognized all too well. Among the photographs was a picture of a young woman named Amy. She was shown standing in the middle of a darkened room, her eyes wide with fear. In the background, there was a shadowy figure, its features obscured by the darkness. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Amy, the first of many." Blade felt a surge of anger as he looked at the photograph. This was no random victim, this was someone who had been specifically targeted by the vampire pictured alongside her. And based on the tone of the notes, it was clear that this was not an isolated incident. There were more vampires out there, and they were actively hunting down and killing humans. As Blade continued to sift through the vampire's belongings, he came across something that made his blood run cold. It was a small, leather-bound book, filled with pages of handwritten text. The writing was in an ancient language that Blade did not recognize, but the illustrations that accompanied the text were unmistakable. They depicted scenes of vampires feasting on humans, their victims shown in various states of terror and despair. Blade realized that this book was a guide, a manual for those who sought to join the ranks of the undead. It contained everything one would need to know in order to become a vampire, from the ritualistic incantations to the specific steps one must take in order to turn a human into one of the creatures of the night. As Blade closed the book and tucked it into his own pocket, he knew that he had stumbled upon something big. This book was proof that the vampires were actively recruiting, that they were seeking to build their numbers and expand their reach. And it was up to Blade to stop them. The events of the past few hours had left Blade with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the vampires were a formidable foe, but he also knew that he had the skills and the determination necessary to stand against them. He would not let the actions of these creatures go unpunished. He would not let them continue to harm the innocent. As Blade made his way through the city, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The vampires had shown their true nature, revealing themselves to be nothing more than ruthless killers. And yet, there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for their cunning and their ability to adapt to the changing world around them. Blade thought about the book that he had found, about the potential dangers that it posed. He knew that the vampires would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and he also knew that he would have to be extremely careful in his efforts to uncover the truth about the book and its significance to the vampire community. As he walked, Blade was approached by a group of people who recognized him as the legendary figure known as Blade, the Daywalker. They had heard stories of his battles against the vampires, and they looked to him as a beacon of hope in a world that seemed to be growing increasingly dark. Blade was hesitant at first, but as he looked into the faces of the people who had come to him for help, he knew that he could not turn away. He would stand with them, and together, they would fight against the forces of darkness that sought to destroy their way of life. With newfound resolve, Blade set out on a mission to protect the innocent and to bring an end to the reign of terror inflicted by the vampires. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he also knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait for him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Blade felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had found his purpose, and he was ready to see it through to the end. The year was 2020, and the town of Virginia, nestled in the heart of Alaska, was in the midst of a crisis. A sudden and inexplicable blackout had plunged the town into darkness, and with it, a sense of fear and uncertainty had taken hold of its residents. Blade found himself in the midst of this crisis, standing in the midst of a group of townsfolk who had gathered in the town square. They were a diverse bunch, ranging from young idealists to grizzled veterans of past conflicts. But despite their differences, they were united in their determination to see their town through this difficult time. As Blade looked around at the faces of the people gathered before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship. These were his people, the innocent victims of a conflict that they had no part in. And he knew that he had a responsibility to protect them, to stand up for them and to fight against the forces that sought to do them harm. The sheriff of Virginia, a grizzled old man named John McClane, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "We've had reports of strange creatures lurking in the shadows," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "We need someone with your particular set of skills to help us track these creatures down and put an end to this madness." Blade nodded, accepting the sheriff's request with a sense of determination. He knew that this would be a dangerous assignment, but he also knew that it was one that he was uniquely qualified to undertake. He had spent years honing his skills as a hunter of the undead, and he was ready to put them to use in defense of the innocent. As Blade began his investigation into the strange occurrences in Virginia, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The town was shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional distant howl. It was as if something was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. Blade's search for clues led him to the outskirts of town, where he discovered a series of cryptic symbols etched into the bark of a large oak tree. They were the marks of a vampire, and they served as a grim reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the town's defenses. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Blade knew that the time had come to act. He gathered a small group of trusted allies, including the sheriff and a few of the town's bravest residents, and together, they set out to confront the vampire threat head-on. The group moved cautiously through the woods, their senses heightened as they searched for any sign of the vampires. Blade led the way, his eyes scanning the darkness for any indication of movement. Suddenly, a faint rustling sound caught his attention. He froze, listening intently, his senses on high alert. The sound grew louder, and then, from out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a vampire, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Blade didn't hesitate. He drew his stake and charged forward, his movements lightning fast. The vampire tried to defend itself, but Blade was too quick and too skilled. With a swift and deadly thrust, he plunged the stake into the vampire's chest, ending its reign of terror once and for all. The successful execution of their mission boosted the group's morale, but Blade knew that this was far from over. The vampires were a formidable foe, and they would not take this defeat lying down. As they made their way back to the safety of the town, Blade couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The vampires had shown their true nature, revealing themselves to be nothing more than ruthless killers. And yet, there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for their cunning and their ability to adapt to the changing world around them. Blade thought about the symbols he had discovered earlier that day. They were a clear sign that the vampires were active in this part of the country, and that they were likely to strike again. He knew that it was up to him and his team to stop them. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Blade felt a sense of resolve wash over him. He had faced down vampires before, and he knew that he was ready to do it again. He would not let these creatures harm the innocent people of Virginia. He would not let them continue to spread their darkness across the land. With newfound determination, Blade set out on a mission to protect the people of Virginia and to bring an end to the reign of terror inflicted by the vampires. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he also knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait for him. As the day wore on, Blade and his team worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses and prepare for the inevitable counterattack from the vampires. They barricaded the doors and windows of the auto body shop that served as their makeshift headquarters, stockpiling ammunition and weapons in anticipation of the battle to come. Blade took the time to brief the team on what to expect from their adversaries. He spoke of the vampires' speed, their strength, and their ability to heal from even the most grievous injuries. He also warned them about the vampires' hypnotic powers, which could render even the bravest warriors helpless against their will. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a sense of camaraderie and determination among the team members. They were a motley crew, brought together by circumstance and united by a common cause. And as they stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever lay ahead, they knew that they had each other's backs. As night fell, the vampires launched their attack. The skies above Virginia erupted in a cacophony of howls and screeches as the creatures descended upon the town. The air was filled with the sound of breaking glass and crumbling brick as the vampires smashed their way through the defenses of the auto body shop. Blade and his team fought back with everything they had. They fired their weapons, threw Molotov cocktails, and even used their bare hands to fend off the vampires. Blade moved through the chaos with a grace and precision that belied his imposing physique. He was a whirlwind of violence, dispatching vampires with ruthless efficiency. Despite their valiant efforts, it soon became apparent that the vampires were too strong, too numerous. The team found themselves being pushed back, their defenses beginning to crumble. In a desperate bid to turn the tide of the battle, Blade led a daring charge against the vampires' main force. He moved with a speed and ferocity that caught the vampires off guard, taking down several of the creatures with swift and decisive strikes. His actions inspired the rest of the team, and together, they launched a fierce counterattack. The vampires fought back with all their might, but they were no match for the determination and bravery of Blade and his allies. As the battle raged on, Blade found himself face to face with the leader of the vampire horde, a towering figure with eyes that glowed like embers from an inferno. This was the vampire who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, the one who had been responsible for the attacks on Virginia and who had sought to use the town as a base of operations for his kind. Blade knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, The moment when he would finally be able to put an end to the vampire's reign of terror. With a fierce cry, he launched himself at the vampire, his stake at the ready. The vampire leader was caught off guard by Blade's sudden attack. He had not expected the human to be so bold, so fearless. But as he looked into Blade's eyes, he saw something there that gave him pause. It was a fierce determination, a burning desire for revenge that was matched only by his own. With a swift and deadly motion, Blade plunged the stake into the vampire's chest. The creature let out a cry of surprise and pain as it felt the wooden shaft pierce its heart. It stumbled backwards, its strength ebbing away as the life drained from its body. Blade stood over the fallen vampire, his chest heaving with exertion. He had done it, he had killed the vampire who had been responsible for so much suffering and death. But he knew that this was far from over. The vampires were a resilient species, and there were sure to be more of them out there, more of them who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. As he turned to rejoin his team, Blade saw that the battle was far from won. The vampires were still fighting, still trying to break through the defenders' lines. Blade knew that he would have to use every ounce of his skill and cunning if he was going to be able to turn the tide of this conflict. With renewed vigor, Blade launched himself back into the fray, his eyes scanning the battlefield for any sign of weakness in the vampire ranks. He moved with a grace and speed that was nothing short of supernatural, cutting down vampire after vampire with ruthless efficiency. The team fought alongside Blade, their spirits buoyed by his presence. They had been through so much together, and they knew that they could count on each other no matter what challenges they faced. As the battle raged on, Blade found himself drawn into a fierce hand-to-hand combat with a particularly formidable vampire. The creature was huge, its muscles bulging beneath its pale, scaly skin. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, almost demonic light, and its fangs were long and sharp. Blade knew that this was going to be a difficult fight. The vampire was strong, stronger than any he had faced before. But he also knew that he had the skills and the determination necessary to emerge victorious. With a fierce cry, Blade launched himself at the vampire, his fists flying in a blur of motion. The vampire was caught off guard by the ferocity of Blade's attack, and for a moment, it was on the defensive, struggling to protect itself against the onslaught of punches and kicks. Blade took advantage of the vampire's momentary confusion, striking it with a series of rapid-fire blows that sent it stumbling backwards. The creature tried to retaliate, but Blade was too fast, too agile. He dodged the vampire's clumsy attacks with ease, countering each one with a strike of his own. As the fight wore on, it became apparent that the vampire was beginning to tire. Its movements were slower and more labored, its blows less powerful than they had been at the start of the battle. Blade sensed his opening and took it, striking the vampire with a devastating combination of punches and kicks that sent it crashing to the ground. The vampire tried to get back to its feet, but Blade was having none of that. With a swift and decisive motion, he reached down and grabbed the creature by the throat, his fingers closing tightly around its windpipe. He held the vampire in a grip of iron, his muscles straining with the effort of holding the creature in place. As the vampire struggled to break free from Blade's grasp, he leaned in close and whispered a single word in the creature's ear. It was a word that meant nothing to the vampire, a word that was simply a trigger for the ancient, dormant vampire-destroying virus that was hidden within Blade's DNA. The vampire's eyes widened in shock and fear as it realized what Blade was. The creature had heard the stories, had heard the whispered tales of the Daywalker, a half-human, half-vampire hybrid who carried within him the power to destroy their kind. As the realization dawned on the vampire, it tried to break free from Blade's grip, to try and escape the fate that it knew was waiting for it. But Blade was too strong, too determined. He held the creature fast, his fingers digging deep into the flesh of its neck. With a swift and final motion, Blade plunged his fangs into the vampire's throat, triggering the dormant vampire-destroying virus that was hidden within his DNA. The virus coursed through the vampire's body, causing its skin to erupt in a series of painful, disfiguring boils and blisters. The vampire let out a cry of agony and terror as it realized that it was about to meet its end. Blade held the vampire in place as the virus continued to wreak havoc on its body. He watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the creature's life ebbed away, its once powerful form slowly shrinking down to nothing more than a pile of ashes and dust. As the last vestiges of the vampire's life force faded away, Blade released his grip on the creature's throat, allowing it to collapse to the ground in a heap of lifeless, decaying flesh. He stood up, his chest heaving with exertion, his eyes scanning the battlefield for any remaining threats. The fight was over, but Blade knew that the war was far from won. The vampires were a resilient species, and they would not take this defeat lying down. They would regroup, they would recover, and then they would come back, hungrier and more determined than ever before. As he walked away from the lifeless body of the vampire he had just defeated, Blade couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. And he knew that he would have to be ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait for him in the days and weeks to come. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm, golden light over the battlefield, Blade felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced the darkness and had emerged victorious. But he also knew that the darkness was always there, lurking just beyond the edge of town, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. Blade knew that he would have to remain vigilant, that he would have to continue to fight, continue to protect the innocent from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. And he was ready to do just that. With newfound resolve, Blade set out on a mission to seek out and destroy any remaining vampires who might still be lurking in the shadows, to ensure that the people of Virginia, and of the world beyond, would be safe from the threat posed by the undead. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the town of Virginia slowly began to emerge from the darkness that had enveloped it for so long. The residents of the town, exhausted but triumphant, began the arduous task of rebuilding their community, of doing whatever it took to restore their lives to some semblance of normalcy. Blade, along with the rest of the team, played a key role in the efforts to rebuild Virginia. He worked tirelessly alongside his comrades, using his unique skills and knowledge to help secure the town and to ensure that the vampires would never again pose a threat to the lives of its people. Despite the many challenges that they faced, the people of Virginia were determined to persevere. They had been through the fires of adversity and had come out the other side stronger and more united than ever before. And as they worked together to rebuild their town, they knew that they had each other, and that together, they could overcome even the darkest of obstacles. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the town of Virginia slowly but surely began to heal. The wounds inflicted by the vampire attack would not soon be forgotten, but they were no longer the defining characteristic of the town and its people. Instead, they had become a source of strength and resilience, a reminder of the trials they had faced and of the victories they had achieved. Blade, too, found himself changing and growing in the aftermath of the vampire attack. He had always been a solitary figure, a man who had spent much of his life alone, living on the fringes of society. But as he worked alongside the people of Virginia, he began to realize that he did not have to be alone anymore. He had found a new purpose in life, a new reason to keep going, even when things seemed their darkest. As the sun rose over the newly rebuilt town of Virginia, Blade stood atop a hill that overlooked the town. He looked out over the rooftops and the streets, watching as the people below went about their daily lives, their faces filled with hope and determination. Blade felt a sense of peace wash over him as he took in the sight of the thriving community that he had helped to save. He knew that there were still many challenges ahead, that there would be many more battles to be fought in the days and years to come. But he also knew that he was ready to face whatever the future might hold. The town of Virginia had been through a lot. The sudden and inexplicable blackout had plunged the town into darkness, and then, as if that weren't enough, a group of vampires had descended upon the unsuspecting residents, wreaking havoc and terror throughout the community. But despite the trauma and devastation that they had endured, the people of Virginia were determined to persevere. Blade, with his unique abilities and knowledge, had played a crucial role in the town's defense. His ability to track down and eliminate the vampires had been instrumental in turning the tide of the battle, and his bravery and tactical prowess had inspired the rest of the townsfolk to stand up for their homes and their way of life. In the aftermath of the vampire attack, Blade had become something of a local hero. The people of Virginia looked to him as a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light to be found. And as he walked the streets of the town, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment knowing that he had done his part to help the people of Virginia regain control of their lives. As the town continued to rebuild and recover from the recent events, Blade found himself reflecting on the nature of his existence. He had spent much of his life on the fringes of society, living as a lone wolf, content to keep to himself and to avoid the complexities and potential dangers of human interaction. But the events in Virginia had forced him to confront the fact that he was not alone, that there were others out there who shared his struggles and his values. Blade had begun to form a bond with the people of Virginia, a bond based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to protecting the innocent from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. And as he walked among the townsfolk, he found himself feeling a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. The future was uncertain, and there were sure to be many more challenges ahead. But as Blade stood on the streets of Virginia, surrounded by the people he had sworn to protect, he knew that he was ready to face whatever the future might hold. The town of Virginia was still reeling from the recent vampire attack. The streets were littered with debris, and the once peaceful community was now scarred by the remnants of the battle that had raged through its streets. But despite the destruction and the trauma, there was a sense of hope and determination among the townsfolk. Blade, along with a small team of allies, had taken it upon himself to track down and eliminate any remaining vampires who might still be lurking in the shadows, seeking to do harm to the innocent residents of Virginia. His skills as a hunter of the undead were unmatched, and his unwavering commitment to safeguarding humanity from the forces of darkness made him the perfect candidate for this dangerous and delicate mission. As he moved through the town, Blade's senses were on high alert, his every sense attuned to the subtlest sounds and movements that might indicate the presence of a vampire. He knew that the creatures he sought were cunning and ruthless, and he would have to be at the top of his game if he was going to be able to protect the people of Virginia from their evil clutches. Blade's search led him to the outskirts of town, where he discovered a small, secluded cave that he believed might be the vampire's last known hideout. With a fierce determination burning in his chest, he prepared to confront the creatures and to put an end to their reign of terror once and for all. As he approached the entrance to the cave, Blade could feel the weight of the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. He knew that this was going to be a difficult and dangerous mission, but he also knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait for him. With a deep breath, he stepped into the darkness of the cave, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The cave was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of decay and corruption. Blade moved cautiously through the darkness, his eyes straining to penetrate the gloom that shrouded the cave's interior. He could hear the distant sounds of dripping water and shifting stone, but there was no sign of the vampires he sought. Blade's determination never wavered, even as the minutes ticked by with no sign of the creatures he was hunting. He knew that the vampires were cunning and patient, and that they might be lying in wait for him, using their ability to blend into the shadows to their advantage. As Blade continued his search of the cave, he found himself confronting a series of moral and ethical dilemmas that were as complex as they were unexpected. The vampires he hunted were not mere mindless monsters, they were intelligent beings with their own motivations and desires. And as he faced them, he could not help but wonder whether his actions were truly in line with his values and beliefs. Blade had always considered himself to be a guardian of humanity, a protector of the innocent from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. But as he stood before the vampires, he realized that things were not always as black and white as he had once believed. There were shades of gray, subtle nuances that called into question the moral certainties that he had once held so dear. Despite his inner turmoil, Blade knew that he could not afford to hesitate. The vampires posed a significant threat to the safety and well-being of the people of Virginia, and he had a duty to protect them, even if it meant facing down creatures who were more than just monsters. With a heavy heart, Blade prepared to confront the vampires and to do whatever it took to ensure the safety of the town and its people. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, and that the choices he made in the coming moments would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. As the standoff between Blade and the vampires reached its climax, Blade found himself at the center of a moral and philosophical maelstrom. The choices he made in the heat of battle would define not just his own destiny, but the fate of the world beyond the walls of the cave. In the end, Blade's unwavering commitment to the principles that had guided him throughout his life proved to be the decisive factor in the conflict. With a fierce determination burning in his chest, he launched a daring and innovative counterattack that caught the vampires off guard and ultimately led to their downfall. As the dust settled and the last of the vampires fell to the ground, Blade stood victorious, but the cost of his victory weighed heavily on his conscience. He had done what he believed was right, but he also knew that the path he had chosen was fraught with unintended and far-reaching consequences. The events that had unfolded in the small town of Virginia had sent shockwaves throughout the world. The revelation that vampires were not just the stuff of folklore and legend, but were in fact real, had sent governments and law enforcement agencies scrambling to understand the implications of this new threat. And as the world grappled with the reality of the vampire menace, Blade found himself at the center of a maelstrom of political and ideological debate. Some argued that the vampires represented a clear and present danger to humanity, and that drastic measures needed to be taken to protect the innocent from their evil clutches. Others argued that the vampires were not inherently evil, but were rather victims of circumstances beyond their control, and that a more nuanced and compassionate approach was needed to address the crisis. Blade, with his unique perspective and wealth of knowledge and experience, found himself at the heart of the controversy. His actions in Virginia had been hailed as heroic by some, but they had also been criticized as heavy-handed and unjust by others. And as he navigated the treacherous waters of political and ideological debate, he knew that he would have to be extremely careful in order to avoid being drawn into a conflict that was as much about ideology and politics as it was about the fate of the vampires. Despite the challenges and complexities that lay ahead, Blade remained steadfast in his commitment to protecting humanity from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. He knew that the path he had chosen was fraught with peril, and that the choices he made in the coming days and weeks would have far-reaching consequences for all of humanity. As the world continued to grapple with the reality of the vampire threat, Blade found himself reflecting on the nature of his existence and the role he was destined to play in the ongoing struggle between light and darkness. He had always believed that his purpose in life was to serve as a guardian of humanity, a protector of the innocent from the forces of evil that sought to do them harm. But as he faced the challenges and complexities of the present day, he realized that his role in the world was far more nuanced and multifaceted than he had ever imagined. Blade knew that the road ahead would be difficult and fraught with danger, but he also knew that he was ready to face whatever the future might hold. With his unwavering commitment to the principles that had guided him throughout his life, he set out on a mission to seek out and destroy any remaining vampires who might still be lurking in the shadows, seeking to do harm to the innocent residents of Virginia and of the world beyond. As Blade journeyed through the rugged and unforgiving landscape of the American heartland, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The world was changing, and with that change came new challenges and new threats to the safety and well-being of humanity. And as he moved ever closer to the next potential hotbed of vampire activity, he knew that he would have to be at the top of his game if he was going to be able to protect the innocent from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. Blade's travels took him through a series of small towns and rural communities, each with its own unique culture and way of life. He met with local law enforcement officials and with members of the community, sharing his knowledge and expertise with them, and working with them to bolster their defenses against the vampire threat. As he moved from place to place, Blade couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship with the people he encountered. They were ordinary individuals, doing their best to live ordinary lives, but they were also brave and resolute, ready and willing to stand up for their communities and their way of life. And as he worked alongside them, he knew that the future of humanity hinged not just on his own actions, but on the collective efforts of all those who chose to stand against the forces of darkness. Despite the many challenges and obstacles that lay ahead, Blade remained steadfast in his commitment to the principles that had guided him throughout his life. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that he was ready to face whatever the future might hold. With his unwavering determination and his unshakable belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, he set out on a mission to seek out and destroy any remaining vampires who might still be lurking in the shadows, seeking to do harm to the innocent residents of the American heartland and beyond. As Blade continued his journey, he found himself drawn into a web of intrigue and deception that threatened to plunge the world into an even deeper state of chaos and uncertainty. He discovered that the vampires were not acting alone, but were instead being manipulated and controlled by a shadowy and secretive organization that sought to use their supernatural abilities to further its own nefarious agenda. Blade knew that he would have to be extremely cautious in order to uncover the truth behind the vampires' actions and to prevent them from achieving their goals. He would have to use all of his skills and resources, as well as whatever allies he could muster, to unravel the mystery that lay at the heart of the current crisis and to bring the perpetrators of this evil to justice. The town of Virginia was once again a place of peace and tranquility. The vampire siege that had shaken the town to its core was nothing more than a distant memory, a dark and traumatic event that had forever altered the lives of its residents. But despite the passage of time, the scars of that fateful night still lingered, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the world. Blade, ever the vigilant protector of humanity, had not rested on his laurels since the defeat of the vampires. He had continued to patrol the streets of Virginia and of the world beyond, ever watchful for any sign of the undead or any other threat to the safety and well-being of the innocent. And as he walked the streets of the town, he could not help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that his actions had helped to ensure the survival and prosperity of the human race. But even as he reveled in the fruits of his labor, Blade knew that the war against the vampires was far from over. There were still many dangers lurking in the darkness, many battles yet to be fought and won. And as he prepared to face whatever challenges the future might hold, he knew that he would have to be as vigilant and as resolute as ever before. The people of Virginia, for their part, had not forgotten the sacrifices that had been made to save their town and their way of life. They had come together as a community, their bonds of friendship and camaraderie stronger than ever before. And as they looked to the future, they did so with a sense of hope and optimism, knowing that as long as they stood together, there was nothing that they could not overcome. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the town of Virginia, Blade stood atop a hill that overlooked the community he had sworn to protect. He looked out over the rooftops and the streets, watching as the people below went about their daily lives, their faces filled with joy and contentment. Blade felt a sense of peace wash over him as he took in the sight of the thriving and resilient community that he had helped to save. He knew that there would always be challenges and obstacles to face, but he also knew that as long as he had the support of the people of Virginia, he would be ready and able to meet whatever the future might hold. The town of Virginia had undergone a significant transformation in the months following the vampire siege. The once vibrant and bustling community had been left scarred by the events of that fateful night, but it had also been galvanized by the shared experience of survival and the shared commitment to rebuilding and recovering from the trauma inflicted by the undead. Blade, now recognized as a hero by the people of Virginia, had become an integral part of the town's fabric. He had taken on the role of a community guardian, working closely with the local sheriff and with a group of dedicated citizens who had banded together to form a volunteer militia. Together, they patrolled the streets of Virginia, ever vigilant for any sign of trouble, any indication that the vampires might one day return to wreak havoc once again. Despite the newfound sense of security that had taken hold in Virginia, Blade remained as vigilant as ever. He knew that the war against the vampires was an ongoing struggle, and that there was always a possibility that the creatures might one day rise up again to challenge the fragile peace that had been established in the town. And so, he continued to hone his skills, to train diligently, and to prepare for whatever challenges the future might bring. As the people of Virginia went about their daily lives, they could not help but feel a sense of gratitude and respect for the man who had saved them from the brink of destruction. Blade had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for redemption and renewal. But even as the people of Virginia looked to the future with a sense of optimism and anticipation, there were those among them who could not shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the wake of the vampire siege. There were whispers of discontent and division, rumors of a faction within the community that sought to capitalize on the recent events for their own nefarious purposes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Blade stood at the edge of town, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of danger. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, and that he would have to be constantly on his guard if he was going to be able to protect the people of Virginia from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. The town of Virginia had become a place of refuge and safety for those who had been touched by the tragedy of the vampire siege. The once vibrant and bustling community had been forever changed by the events of that fateful night, but it had also been galvanized by the shared experience of survival and the shared commitment to rebuilding and recovering from the trauma inflicted by the undead. Blade, now recognized as a hero by the people of Virginia, had become an integral part of the town's fabric. He had taken on the role of a community guardian, working closely with the local sheriff and with a group of dedicated citizens who had banded together to form a volunteer militia. Together, they patrolled the streets of Virginia, ever vigilant for any sign of trouble, any indication that the vampires might one day return to wreak havoc once again. Despite the newfound sense of security that had taken hold in Virginia, Blade remained as vigilant as ever. He knew that the war against the vampires was an ongoing struggle, and that there was always a possibility that the creatures might one day rise up again to challenge the fragile peace that had been established in the town. And so, he continued to hone his skills, to train diligently, and to prepare for whatever challenges the future might bring. As the people of Virginia went about their daily lives, they could not help but feel a sense of gratitude and respect for the man who had saved them from the brink of destruction. Blade had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for redemption and renewal. But even as the people of Virginia looked to the future with a sense of optimism and anticipation, there were those among them who could not shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the wake of the vampire siege. There were whispers of discontent and division, rumors of a faction within the community that sought to capitalize on the recent events for their own nefarious purposes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Blade stood at the edge of town, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of danger. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, and that he would have to be constantly on his guard if he was going to be able to protect the people of Virginia from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. The world had moved on from the events that had unfolded in the small town of Virginia. The vampire siege that had once threatened the very existence of the community had become nothing more than a distant memory, a dark and traumatic event that had forever altered the lives of its residents. But despite the passage of time, the scars of that fateful night still lingered, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the world. Blade, ever the vigilant protector of humanity, had not rested on his laurels since the defeat of the vampires. He had continued to patrol the streets of Virginia and of the world beyond, ever watchful for any sign of the undead or any other threat to the safety and well-being of the innocent. And as he walked the streets of the town, he could not help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that his actions had helped to ensure the survival and prosperity of the human race. But even as he reveled in the fruits of his labor, Blade knew that the war against the vampires was far from over. There were still many dangers lurking in the darkness, many battles yet to be fought and won. And as he prepared to face whatever challenges the future might hold, he knew that he would have to be as vigilant and as resolute as ever before. The people of Virginia, for their part, had not forgotten the sacrifices that had been made to save their town and their way of life. They had come together as a community, their bonds of friendship and camaraderie stronger than ever before. And as they looked to the future, they did so with a sense of hope and optimism, knowing that as long as they stood together, there was nothing that they could not overcome. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the town of Virginia, Blade stood atop a hill that overlooked the community he had sworn to protect. He looked out over the rooftops and the streets, watching as the people below went about their daily lives, their faces filled with joy and contentment. Blade felt a sense of peace wash over him as he took in the sight of the thriving and resilient community that he had helped to save. He knew that there would always be challenges and obstacles to face, but he also knew that as long as he had the support of the people of Virginia, he would be ready and able to meet whatever the future might hold. The town of Virginia had come a long way since the days when it had been under siege by the vampires. The once fragile community had grown stronger and more united than ever before, its residents bound together by a shared experience of survival and a shared commitment to rebuilding and recovering from the trauma inflicted by the undead. Blade, now more than ever a symbol of hope and resilience, had become an integral part of the town's identity. He had taken on the role of a community guardian, working closely with the local sheriff and with a group of dedicated citizens who had banded together to form a volunteer militia. Together, they patrolled the streets of Virginia, ever vigilant for any sign of trouble, any indication that the vampires might one day return to wreak havoc once again. Despite the newfound sense of security that had taken hold in Virginia, Blade remained as vigilant as ever. He knew that the war against the vampires was an ongoing struggle, and that there was always a possibility that the creatures might one day rise up again to challenge the fragile peace that had been established in the town. And so, he continued to hone his skills, to train diligently, and to prepare for whatever challenges the future might bring. As the people of Virginia went about their daily lives, they could not help but feel a sense of gratitude and respect for the man who had saved them from the brink of destruction. Blade had become a legend in his own right, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for redemption and renewal. But even as the people of Virginia looked to the future with a sense of optimism and anticipation, there were those among them who could not shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the wake of the vampire siege. There were whispers of discontent and division, rumors of a faction within the community that sought to capitalize on the recent events for their own nefarious purposes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Blade stood at the edge of town, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of danger. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, and that he would have to be constantly on his guard if he was going to be able to protect the people of Virginia from the forces of darkness that sought to do them harm. But as he stood there, looking out over the town he had sworn to protect, Blade could not help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had faced down the vampires and had emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. And as he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point, he knew that he had truly found his calling as the Daywalker, the guardian of the night. Chapter 6: X-Force vs. the Dead. The X-Force stood before a swirling, multicolored portal, their expressions a mix of awe and trepidation. Deadpool, ever the clown, cracked his neck and joked, "Well, here we go, gang. Who knows what kind of interdimensional shenanigans we'll find ourselves in?" Cable, the team's de facto leader, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the portal. "Stay close," he warned, raising his hand to halt the team's advance. "We don't know what we're walking into." As they crossed the threshold, the world around them dissolved into a cacophony of colors and sensations. The air seemed to thicken, and the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and distort. It was as if they were stepping through a veil into another dimension. When the distortion subsided, the X-Force found themselves in the setting of the 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead. They were standing in the dimly lit basement of the farmhouse, surrounded by the characters from the film, including Ben, Barbara, Harry, Helen, and Tom. The film's characters were shocked by the sudden appearance of the X-Force, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "What in God's name are you people?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Cable stepped forward, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he said. "We're from another place, another time. We've been brought here by a rift in the fabric of reality." The team quickly realized that they were in a race against time. "We need to find a way to close this portal," Cable said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "But first, we need to understand what's going on here." The X-Force and the film's characters began to strategize, pooling their knowledge and resources to tackle the undead threat that loomed over them. It was a daunting task, but together, they were determined to find a way home. As the minutes ticked by, the X-Force and the film's characters worked tirelessly to devise a plan. The farmhouse was eerily quiet, save for the occasional groan from the undead that lingered outside. X23, the young clone of Wolverine, suggested using the farmhouse's upper levels as a vantage point to scout out the surrounding area. "We need to know how many of them are out there," she said, her eyes gleaming with determination. Deadpool, ever the wild card, suggested a more unconventional approach. "Why not just kick down the front door and let the undead come to us?" he proposed, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "It's not like they haven't seen worse." Despite the tension and uncertainty, the team managed to find some levity in the face of impending doom. It was a coping mechanism, a way to deal with the fear that threatened to overwhelm them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they were ready to put their plan into action. The X-Force took up positions around the farmhouse, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the undead. Cable, with his ability to manipulate time, halted time around them, giving them a few precious moments to prepare for the onslaught that was sure to come. As the first wave of undead came into view, the X-Force sprang into action. X-23 leapt from the roof of the farmhouse, her adamantium claws gleaming in the moonlight as she descended upon the horde. Deadpool, meanwhile, unleashed a flurry of kicks and punches, his gleeful whoops cutting through the night air. The battle was intense, with the X-Force working in perfect sync to take down their adversaries. Wolverine, with his healing factor and enhanced senses, tore through the undead with ease, while Catherine York, the new Deathmaster, used her psychic powers to disrupt the undead's ability to coordinate their attacks. The farmhouse became a battleground, with the X-Force holding their ground against the relentless tide of the undead. Ben, Barbara, Harry, Helen, and Tom fought with valor, their determination to survive evident in every swing of their bats and garden tools. Deadpool, reveling in the chaos, wove in and out of the fray, his unorthodox fighting style causing confusion and fear among the undead. "Scream for me, zombies," he taunted, landing a perfectly timed punch to the jaw of a staggering zombie. Cable, from his vantage point atop the farmhouse, monitored the battle, his mind attuned to the rhythms of time. He could feel the fabric of reality straining under the weight of the conflict, but he was determined to maintain control over their surroundings. X-23, her movements a blur of speed and agility, took on the role of scout, darting between the undead and relaying vital information to the rest of the team. Her combat skills were honed to perfection, and she fought with a ferocity that belied her youth. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the X-Force was more than a match for the undead. Their combined strength and ingenuity had turned the tide of the conflict, and the undead began to falter. In the midst of the fighting, Cable felt a familiar tug at the edges of his consciousness. It was the call of the portal, a reminder that their journey was far from over. There were other universes out there, other realities where the stakes were just as high, and the challenges just as daunting. But for now, the X-Force had a job to do. And they were determined to see it through to the end. As the night wore on, the battle at the farmhouse continued unabated. The X-Force, fueled by adrenaline and a shared determination to survive, fought with a ferocity that the undead could not match. Deadpool, finding himself cornered by a group of undead, unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks, his movements a whirlwind of chaos. "I'm the merc with a mouth, and I've got a license to kill," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. X23, her body adorned with gashes and bruises, continued to serve as the team's scout, her keen senses alert to any changes in the battlefield. "There's a horde coming from the east," she called out, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Cable, his body braced against the strain of maintaining control over time, felt the ground shudder beneath his feet as the undead launched a full-scale assault on the farmhouse. He raised his hands, and a wave of energy radiated outward, knocking the undead off their feet and giving the X-Force the precious seconds they needed to regroup and counterattack. Wolverine, his claws gleaming with a deadly luster, tore through the undead with a fury that bordered on madness. "I'm the best there is at what I do," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "And what I do is kill." As the battle entered its final stages, it became clear that the X-Force was on the verge of victory. But the cost of that victory was high, and the team knew that they could not afford to let their guard down. There were still more battles to be fought, more universes to be saved. As the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the darkness, the undead that remained began to lose their coordination and strength. It was a sign that the dawn was near, and with it, the end of their reign of terror. The X-Force, weary but triumphant, stood together on the steps of the farmhouse, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the undead's return. They knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be other battles to fight, other universes to save. But for now, they had won a hard-fought victory, and they were determined to savor it. As the sun began its descent below the horizon, the X-Force found themselves in a state of uneasy calm. The farmhouse, once a beacon of terror, now stood as a testament to their hard-won victory. But victory, as the X-Force knew all too well, was a fleeting thing. The undead, though weakened by the approaching dawn, still posed a significant threat. The X-Force could not afford to let their guard down, not even for a moment. Cable, his body still braced against the strain of maintaining control over time, felt the familiar tug at the edges of his consciousness. It was a signal that the portal was once again active, a reminder that their journey was far from over. The team quickly regrouped, their minds focused on the task at hand. They knew that they would need to be at the top of their game if they were to have any chance of overcoming the challenges that lay ahead. As the night deepened, the X-Force took up their positions, their eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the undead. The farmhouse, once a place of refuge, now stood as a fortress, its walls reinforced by the combined strength and determination of the team. X23, her body still bearing the scars of the previous night's battle, took to the rooftops, her keen senses attuned to the slightest hint of movement in the darkness below. "I've got eyes on the horizon," she called out, her voice steady despite the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. "The undead are regrouping. They're going to come at us harder than before." Deadpool, ever the wild card, cracked his knuckles in anticipation of the impending battle. "Time to put on a show," he quipped, his voice a mocking echo in the stillness of the night. "Or, just time to kick some undead butt and take names." Wolverine, his eyes burning with a fierce determination, stood shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the team, his claws extended and ready for battle. "Let them come," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "We're ready for them." As the first hints of dawn began to break on the horizon, a sense of dread crept over the X-Force. They knew that the dawn would bring with it a new wave of undead, a horde that would be unlike anything they had faced before. The X-Force, bolstered by their previous victory, stood their ground as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the landscape. The farmhouse, once a sanctuary, now served as their last line of defense against the encroaching undead hordes. Ben, Barbara, Harry, Helen, and Tom, the survivors of the original film, looked to the X-Force for guidance and protection. Their faith in the team was unwavering, despite the harrowing circumstances they found themselves in. Cable, his eyes fixed on the horizon, felt the familiar pull of the portal. It was a beacon, a call to adventure, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before they were once again thrust into the heart of a new conflict. The team, aware of the impending threat, began to fortify their defenses. Barrels of oil were rolled into the middle of the farmhouse's living room, ready to be ignited in the event of an undead breach. Ben, his hands trembling with fear and adrenaline, distributed boxes of matches throughout the house, ensuring that they would always have a means of setting the oil ablaze. X23, her body still bearing the scars of the previous night's battle, took to the rooftops once again, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "I can see them gathering in the fields to the east," she called out, her voice steady despite the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. "They're moving slowly, but they're coming." Deadpool, ever the clown, attempted to lighten the mood with a few ill-timed jokes. "Hey, team," he quipped, his voice a mocking echo in the stillness of the night. "I've got a great idea. Why don't we just invite the undead over for a nice cup of tea and a game of croquet? I hear they're really into that sort of thing." Despite the tension and uncertainty that hung heavy in the air, the team found solace in each other's company. They were a family, bound together by a shared sense of purpose and a deep-seated determination to survive. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, the X-Force braced themselves for the battle that lay ahead. They knew that the dawn would bring with it a new wave of undead, a horde that would be unlike anything they had faced before. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together, they could overcome any obstacle that came their way. Deadpool, ever the wild card, cracked his knuckles in anticipation of the impending battle. "Time to put on a show," he quipped, his voice a mocking echo in the early morning air. "Or, just time to kick some undead butt and take names." Wolverine, his eyes burning with a fierce determination, stood shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the team, his claws extended and ready for battle. "Let them come," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "We're ready for them." As the undead horde began to make their way towards the farmhouse, the X-Force prepared to defend their hard-won sanctuary. They knew that the battle ahead would be one of the toughest they had faced yet, but they also knew that they had each other, and that together, they could overcome any obstacle that came their way. The team took up their positions, their eyes fixed on the approaching undead. The farmhouse, once a peaceful abode, now stood as a symbol of resistance, its walls reinforced by the courage and determination of those who called it home. As the undead horde drew nearer, the X-Force braced themselves for the battle that lay ahead. The farmhouse, once a place of refuge, now stood as a bastion of hope in a world that had been turned upside down by the zombie apocalypse. Cable, his eyes fixed on the approaching horde, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of battle. He knew that they were on the precipice of a conflict that would test their resolve and their abilities to the very limits. The team, aware of the grave danger that faced them, steeled themselves for the fight that lay ahead. They were a band of survivors, each with their own unique skills and strengths, and they were determined to do whatever it took to protect themselves and their newfound allies. X23, her body still bearing the scars of the previous night's battle, took to the rooftops once again, her eyes scanning the dawnlit landscape for any sign of movement. "I can see them gathering in the fields to the east," she called out, her voice steady despite the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. "They're moving slowly, but they're coming." The team quickly adjusted their strategy, taking advantage of the undead's decreased speed and coordination. They fought with renewed vigor, their movements swift and precise, cutting through the zombie ranks with ease. Deadpool, ever the showman, reveled in the chaos and confusion of the battlefield. "This is glorious," he shouted, his voice a triumphant roar that echoed across the landscape. "We're kicking undead ass and taking names." Wolverine, his eyes burning with a fierce determination, led the charge, his claws tearing through the undead with deadly efficiency. "We've got this," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "We're not going to let them take us down." As the battle drew to a close, the X-Force stood victorious, their bodies battered and bruised, but their spirits unbroken. They had faced the horrors of the zombie apocalypse and emerged triumphant, their bond stronger than ever. But even as they celebrated their hard-won victory, they knew that their journey was far from over. The portal that had brought them to this world was still active, and they would need to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The end.